Coming up on Aggie Almanac, he was one of the winningest college basketball coaches in the nation, but he never forgot his first victory with the Las Cruces High School Bulldogs.
Our first game we played Esleta out of El Paso. They beat us 25 points, and until up through December we were about 500, and then we caught fire and started playing really well.
Hi, I'm Gary Worth, and thanks for watching Aggie Almanac. When it comes to local, even national legends, it's hard to top the man we are about to chat with for the next half hour. In this first of a special two-part program, KRWG's Director of Broadcasting, Glenn Cerny, talks with the Aggie basketball legend, Lou Henson. I'm Glenn Cerny, and we welcome you to our Aggie Legends program, and it gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce, and I'm not sure why I'm introducing this person, Lou Henson, certainly a legend of basketball, not only in Las Cruces, but in Champaign-Urbana as well. First of all, welcome to the studios of KRWG.
Well, thank you, Glenn. It's nice to be here with you. And by the way, you know, when I was coaching, everybody complained about the games we lost, but now that I'm retired, they forget about those.
Well, I'm going to ask you a question in just a little bit about one of your losses, and I'm sure you'll cringe and go, yep, it's the one they all ask for. But can we start way back? And I know you just turned 25, but Oklahoma. How does an Oklahoma kid get to basketball status the way you did? And let's start out with high school. You started as a high school player, and I understand your jersey's retired at OK High School.
That is correct. By the way, OKO High School and Oklahoma OK High School, just north of Muskogee, a small place, and we didn't have football, so the kids had to play all sports. I ran track, played baseball and basketball, and so we had good ball clubs. And when I graduated, I could have gone to some of the smaller schools, smaller universities in the state, but my high school coach wanted me to go to JC because he thought maybe it'd be good enough to go to Oklahoma State. And back then, Henry Iber was a coach, a tremendous coach, and I always wanted to go to Oklahoma State. Well, it didn't work out, so I went to Connors State. And then after that, I was playing with a guy by the name of Jim Miller. So we both wanted to go to Oklahoma State. Well, he got the scholarship, I didn't. So then I came to New Mexico State.
Well, even though you didn't get to play under Coach Iber, it appears that you learned something along the way to make your career successful with the coaches you had, and that brings us to matriculating to Las Cruces. And again, as someone that's moved here recently, I have my own impressions of the first times I laid my eyes on Las Cruces, New Mexico. But for you coming out of Oklahoma, do you remember that first day walking into town?
I certainly do, Glenn. As a matter of fact, there were 4 of us, and we drove up on where we're coming over the Oregon Mountains, and we saw Las Cruces, and of course down the desert. And we came in, and we came to the first service station. We asked them where New Mexico State was. Well, back then we had a little 2-lane highway coming out, and I think we only had maybe 3,000 students at the time. So it was quite a change, because when I grew up where I grew up in Oklahoma, we have a lot of vegetation. It's up in the northeastern part. And it's quite a change arriving here and seeing the city and all.
And we should mention, we're talking, what, 1954, 1955, so the town very, very different than what it is now.
As a matter of fact, Glenn, at that time, I think the population was about 10,000. Now we're probably up around 100,000. Can we use coach speak here? If you were recruiting Lou Henson, how would you describe him as a player that you're recruiting? Well, of course, I couldn't play with the players today, because it's unbelievable how much better the players are today because of weights and coaching, and we just have better athletes. So back then I was an okay player, but not in today's game.
But you didn't answer my question. What kind of player were you?
On that level, I was okay.
Defensive, sharpshooter?
Well, I'll tell you what, I shot all the time. But the coach said, now look, I want each player to do what he can to help the ball club. So Keith Colson, who is the point guard for me, he'd say, why do you shoot so much? I said, well, the coach wants you to do what you do best. And I shot it.
That doesn't mean it was your best attribute. It's what you thought you could do best at that point, right?
That's right. I'm sure I didn't do many things right.
Well, and we talk about Aggie legends. You played for one of truly the great Aggies of all time, and Presley Askew. Your relationship with him, I can only assume after you graduate, you become a graduate assistant, and normally coaches don't ask players to be graduate assistants if they did not see something in them, if they do not get along. Can you talk a little bit about the old coach and your relationship?
Well, Glenn, of course, I played 1 year for Coach Askew at New Mexico State, and then I came out with him. And New Mexico State, we played in Williams Gym about 1,800. I think they advertised 2,200, but concrete bleachers. And we had a great relationship. Coach Askew is one of the finest men I've ever been with. Anytime you talked with him, when you left, you had a better feeling about yourself than you did before. Just a gentleman and a tremendous basketball coach. And he also followed the IBA system. You had to play good defense to play for him. And I just treasure those years that I spent with Coach Askew.
Now, I'm going to jump ahead here, and I don't want to get too far ahead, but you mentioned defense, and my memory, especially of that great Illinois team you had with Gill and that crew, wasn't a whole lot of defense. It was a very high potent offense team. Was that just a change of the time for you, or?
Well, we played defense. However, we were so good offensively, and we ran. It looked like we weren't playing defense, but the years I was at Illinois, those 21 years, at least half of the time, we would lead the league in defense because we had good defensive players, and I came up on good defense. We won the championship in high school at OK High School. The championship game was 16-14. So you see, we didn't shoot a lot, we played defense.
And you were a shooter.
I was a shooter. Did play great defense, but I stayed on the team.
I was astounded. One of the fun things about preparing for this was looking at some of your records and what you did. And you truly, and I think of all the coaches that have tried to be successful, have done things, but from day one, you achieved some levels of success that are positively astounding. Is there anything directly you can relate to coming into a high school coaching position in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and putting together the teams that you did to win 3 straight championships?
Well, first of all, now football coaches are good coaches. Rudy Communis was the AD and head coach for a while, and then Janera was the coach. And of course, they coached football and baseball, and I'm sure they didn't have the program that we did. When I came in, I was given the authority and the power to go ahead and set up what I needed to do. We had all of our grade schools were playing, junior highs, and we were developing teams. However, I coached the B team for a couple of years, and then Vernon Yates, who was the head coach, went into business, and I became the head coach. And so I was a young guy. I didn't apply for the job, and Tom Mayfield, a superintendent, called and said, Lou, aren't you interested in this job? And I said, of course. He said, well, you better come down and talk to me. So I talked to him. Of course, I became the head coach at Las Cruces High School. And our first game, we played Esleta out of El Paso. They beat us 25 points, and until up through December, we were about 500. And then we caught fire and started playing really well. We had Jim Singleton, 6'3", fielder, about 6'1", Mullins, and Joe Lopez, who lives here in town, who was my assistant at Hardin, Simmons, and also here. He is the point guard, Don Ryerson. Well, anyway, we went to the state tournament, and the press in Albuquerque and all over the state thought that it shouldn't even be there. Well, we played Albuquerque High the first game, and Albuquerque High is a tremendous ball club. We won that by 1 point. And then Carlsbad was one of the teams that's supposed to win it, along with Clovis. Along with Roswell. And so we had a great game in the semifinals. We beat them 48-47. They had 3 Division I players, Tom Patty Wolf and another kid. And so what happened to Roswell, Clayton High School upset them in the semifinals. So here we going into the championship game against Clayton. We won that one by 8 points, so that was the first state championship. We had a great team, not very big, but they were tremendous defensively. And Glenn, in that state tournament, we held the teams to 27% from the field, which hasn't been done since. But they were just a great defensive team and could score.
And goes back to that IBA defense.
Right.
All right, let's go to 60-61, and you know I'm going to ask this. 28-1. Who in the heck was the one?
Well, we got beat somewhere along the way. Kind of, would you believe, Creighton? Creighton had a heck of a ball club, and we'd beat them, but they beat us, and so we had great size, we had great guards, and just a tremendous team.
So I've got to ask the question, and obviously this is being said facetiously, but you only made it to the quarterfinals your final year at high school coaching at Las Cruces. Did you get run out of town to Hardin Simmons?
Well, what happened, we thought we could win it because Hobbs was favored to win it along with us, and Hobbs was upset in the morning, and we'd already beaten Valley High School about 15 points 3 weeks before. Well, they upset us. We couldn't make the outside shot, and they were in a zone. And so after that, I was offered the assistant's job at the University of New Mexico. Bob King had come in from Iowa, and so he wanted me to come. And at the same time, I was offered the job at Hardin Simmons University. At that time, Glenn, they were majoring in football and basketball, all sports.
Part of that old border conference.
That is correct. And so, well, anyway, Bob King called me several times while I was on my way down there. And so I got down to Hardin Simmons. They'd only won 8 games, and they had a terrible team for 3 or 4 years there. And so they offered me the job, and I told the board I would take the job if you would integrate the team. They never had a black player. Well, later on that day, they met and decided to do it. So I chose Hardin Simmons University over the University of New Mexico because they were major, and I wanted to be a head coach.
Do you remember, and I mean, we're only talking about, what, 779 wins, so I'm remembering them all I'm sure would be difficult, but that first one, do you remember the first collegiate win you had at Hardin Simmons?
I certainly do. We'd lost about 8 straight games. Now, when I went in, we had 12 junior college players. Everybody was new, and I was a new coach. At that time, I thought I knew everything. I'd won those state championships, and I found out early there's a little bit about the game I didn't know. And one thing I did find out, you have to have players and experienced players. So we'd lost 8 straight, and finally we beat Midwestern University in Wichita Falls, Texas, for the first victory.
And your feeling at that point, I mean, you had no premonition that 778 were on the horizon, but do you remember your impression of finally reaching that milestone?
Well, it's nice to win one because, after all, you have to win some to retain your job.
You know, one thing I was surprised to learn, a great deal of experience as an athletic director. And trying to balance those hats can be an incredible challenge, but both at Hardin Simmons and here at New Mexico State University, you served as athletic director as well.
That is correct. My first year here, I just coached basketball, but Warren Woodson was the AD and head football coach, and so he retired, so they gave me the AD job. Well, for 8 years I did that, and believe it or not, at that time, now, back then we had to do everything that you do now. Now I know it's more difficult, but I had Keith Colson, my assistant, Joe Lopez, both of them live here in town, and he was their business manager. There were 3 of us. And we had a sports information director, and we were doing everything.
Do you ever watch teams now in college basketball, and my goodness, the pros is even more so, and you have more guys wearing suits than you do in uniforms on the benches at this time, and compare it to what you were doing at that juncture?
Well, of course, I always wore a suit or sport coat. Now, some coaches, they still do, and some don't. It just depends. Things have changed over the years.
You know, Thomas Wolfe said you can't go home again. Yet, let's again go to you returning to Las Cruces to coach New Mexico State University. Can you kind of tell us how that unfolded? Because the year before, they had just hired a new coach. So you were a pretty quick turnover coming to NMSU at that juncture.
Warren Woodson, the AD, called me and asked me if I'd meet him in El Paso. He wanted to talk to me about the New Mexico State job, so I met with him and he offered me the job. Well, when Hardin Simmons found out I was interested in the New Mexico State job, this guy with money took me out to lunch. Well, before I lived in a dorm because I wasn't paid much money, and we had an old screen door that's coming apart, and a fellow by the name of Joe, I know his last name, I won't mention it now, he was the superintendent of the facilities and all, and so we kept calling him and asking him to fix the screen door. He'd never do it. And then when the man with money took me out to lunch. He said, look, Lou, we want you to stay here what it will take. Immediately, Glenn, I thought about that screen door. I said, no, thank you. I've already made up my mind.
But again, you think about your success, because just down the road from Las Cruces, New Mexico, there was a gentleman that had just shocked the college basketball world by winning the NCAA championship, and I'm obviously referring to Don Haskins and what was going on at what's now UTEP, West Texas at that point. Yet you meet him very, very early in the season as defending NCAA championships in Upendom.
Well, they had won it the year before, as you stated, Glenn, and they had everybody back but Bobby Joe Hill. They had 6'9", Big Daddy Latin and Shed and all those guys, Worsley and Cager. And so Mary and I were going down in the car, my wife, and I said, if we stay within 30, 35, I'll be happy, because they were a great team. And we had a small ball club. Westmore had 6'5", Wade Gamble 6'1", Turner 6'1", two little guards, Evans and Landis. And so with 3 minutes to go in that game, we had them down 18 and beat them 13. And so people in El Paso, they said, hey, it's a fluke game. Well, we thought it was too, beating them. But what happened, they were big. We had a small ball club. We got a lead. We pulled them out, and they could not defend our passing game because we were quick and could go in there and score. So it was quite a victory for us.
You mentioned small players, and in 68, 69, you had one of my all-time, being 5'8", you can understand why I could relate to Charlie Crist, but for all of the college players you dealt with, inch for inch, the best talent you ever coached?
Probably the best player I've ever had. When we recruited him, we called John Volpe, the coach out of Yonkers, New York, and we said, we're interested in recruiting Charlie Crist. He said, now look, if you're going to come up here and measure him, don't even come. But if you want to talk about a great player, come on up. Well, we didn't measure him, and it's a good thing. See, it's sensitive about that because a lot of coaches had come in, and when they saw how short he was, they wouldn't take him. And so we put him in junior college, brought him here. He is a tremendous player, led us to that championship game, Final Four, and so he was just a fantastic player. Now, he went on. Well, let me tell you the story on him. After 1970, he tried out in the pros, he tried for 5 years, and finally I said, Charlie, you need to go on with your life. You're not going to play pro ball. Would you believe in the next couple of years, he caught on with Atlanta and played 5 or 6 years on the pros, on the pro level, and just did a great job. So he is remarkable, a great individual as well as a super player.
69-70 team. We look back, and again, I think we need to put it in context. At that juncture, the NCAA tournament was not 64 teams. It was not the huge TV event it is today. And I don't mean to diminish the fact that it was the NCAA tournament, but it was a very different realm. And I think I know myself when I looked at New Mexico State and looked at 70, and how the heck did that team get there? But in reality, you had 2 seasons before that set you up for the kind of success that you had in that 69-70 season. Is that
fair?
That
is correct. When we first went to NCAA, I think they had 12 teams, so you had to be pretty good to get invited. Then went up to 16, 24, and 32. But our best ball club was probably in 1968. We had the Miracle Midgets. We had them back, plus these good freshmen who were sophomores, and it is a good blend of talent. And we played UCLA in the second round up in Albuquerque and lost a close game. It was a 3 or 4 point ball game. They finally beat us 9. We had 2 people foul out, and we're trying to foul to win the game. But that was a better ball club than the 1970 Final Four team. That was a great team. Had it not been for UCLA, those 3 years, we had a pretty good chance to win the championship.
You do realize that you were not the only person in that era who said if it hadn't been for UCLA, because there was some guy with a rolled-up program sitting calmly on the sidelines coaching there that had some fair success at UCLA, wasn't there?
Well, I'll tell you, John Wooden was a tremendous coach and a super individual, but he had the ability to also get talent. He had great talent. You put great talent and coaching together, and you've got something.
A couple players I'd like to point out, because at this juncture, New Mexico State starts getting some national recognition with All-Americans. And I know one player that you were very fond of is Jimmy Collins. Could you talk a little bit about Jimmy Collins?
It's quite interesting on Jimmy Collins. When I was at Hardin Simmons, my assistant down there lived in Syracuse, and his dad wanted us to recruit Jimmy Collins. Well, I took a guard out of Texas. Well, we came to New Mexico State, and my assistant's dad got involved. And I said, well, Ed, why don't you go up in the summer and see how good the kid. Well, I saw him play. He came back, he said, he didn't come back. He called me on the phone. He said, Coach, Jimmy Collins is a 6'2", skinny kid. He can't jump. And I said, well, we got the scholarships. Let's take him. Well, he didn't even visit the campus. It took him 4 days on a bus to get from Syracuse, New York to Las Cruces, New Mexico. And he turned out to be an All-American.
Nice coaching decision. Another player on that team, Sam Lacy.
It's quite interesting how he was recruited. When I used to go into Mississippi and recruit, when I was at Hardin Simmons, Ole Miss and Mississippi State would not recruit black players. As a matter of fact, Mississippi State won the SE Conference 3 years, and at least 1 or 2 of those years they wouldn't even go to the playoffs because they'd have to play against black people, and they didn't want to do that. And so I was going in to recruit a junior college player, and this junior college coach said, hey, you better go down to Indianola, Mississippi. There's a 6'8" skinny kid down there who might make a player. So I went down, and Andrew Brown was the coach down there. And back then, that was the time that you had to be careful going into Mississippi, going into the black school. So when I'd go in to recruit him, I'd stay with Andrew Brown. I didn't want to be seen going in and out. I was driving, and I had a out-of-state license plate, and anyway, we signed him. He didn't visit. He came out, and he grew another inch or two and got to be 240, 250, and an All-American.
I mean, again, putting it in context, today we've got Scout.com, we've got the ABC, we've got how many different recruiting sources to come from, and to think about players of that caliber sitting out there is remarkable.
That is correct. And of course, back in the South, a lot of people wouldn't go in and recruit them. And so that was a fertile area for us, and we recruited several out of Mississippi.
Can we spend a little bit of time, because the season ends, you're going to the NCAA, and you go to Fort Worth and play Rice, and honestly win, at least on the scoreboard, very easily, 101-77. At that point, did you realize what you were riding at that juncture?
Well, we knew we had a good ball club because we had been good for 3 years before that, and so we had to go up against Kansas State in the first game of the regionals, and
you've got to go to Lawrence, Kansas.
Right,
so
Lawrence, Kansas.
Essentially, you are really the outsider here. As much as the K-State fans and the Kansas fans don't get along, you still are going to be the outsider in Lawrence.
Sure. So it's going to be a tough game. Cotton Fitzsimmons was the coach at Kansas State at the time. He later went on to coach pro ball, and it was a tremendous game. We won by about 5 or 6 points. Jimmy Collins helped us there at the end to win that ball game. And then the next game, we went against Drake. Now, Maury John was the coach at Drake. He had great ball clubs. He either went to Final Four not that year, but the year before or right after. Just tremendous teams. And we played great. We had them down 18, beat them 10 or 12. And Roadrunner Horn was our backup point guy. Charlie Chris got in foul trouble. He played great. It was one of the great games that I have been associated with, and that put us in the Final Four.
And you go and play at yet another, iconic college basketball site in College Park, Maryland. And again, we can use that old line that if it hadn't been for UCLA, you might have lose 93-77. But can you take us back and talk to us a little bit about that game again against John Wooden? And that would have been Lou Alcindor's years also, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Now that we played against him 2 years before.
Okay.
That year they had Patterson at the post,
That's right.
Vicks,
Okay.
and they had Wicks and Vallely at the forwards, and Vallely and Bibby at the guards. And we played well, but they were tremendous, all 5 of those guys. And I think 2 or 3 of the guys on the bench went to the pro level. But Jimmy Collins was outstanding in that ball game. I think he scored 28 against Wooden, and but we just couldn't contain them.
On the other hand, something, again, they no longer do, but there was a consolation game. And St. Bonaventure at that point was riding an incredible streak with some very, very good talent. And you end up beating them 79-73 to essentially take 3rd place in the nation.
Right, and right after that, they decided to do away with the 3rd place game because after you lose in the semifinals, most kids and coaches don't want to play for third place, but we played well and it was a good victory for us.
Your feelings on the third place, were you sad to see that go? Did you think it was a good move?
Well, I understand the feelings of the coach, but I was glad to have it at that time because it enabled us to have a chance to play another game and win it. And so it worked out well for us, but most coaches would prefer not to have the third place game.
Before you depart and we start thinking and talking about going to that place up north, two other All-Americans that you had here at New Mexico State University, and let's start with John Williamson.
John Williamson was a tremendous player. We had two of his friends from junior college playing for us, and that enabled us to recruit him. But he's one of the finest offensive players I've ever coached. And one night we played UTEP, and UTEP had great ball clubs at that time. UTEP had 21 points, and John had 29. He was that type of scorer. Just is almost impossible to stop him.
The other one, James Moore.
James Moore was, of course, one of our All-Americans, thin, about 6'9", had a tremendous jump shot and an outstanding player. He is also a good rebounder and a good team player.
Well, there is more to come. That was just the first half of Glenn Cerny's exclusive interview with Aggie great coach Lou Henson. Coming up on Aggie Almanac, he's the only coach to ever lead the Aggies to the NC2A Final Four, and he had an astounding number of wins in his career.
Hey, did you understand what 700 wins meant as a college coach?
I felt it.
I didn't ask if you felt it, I asked if you realized it.
Well, when you're coaching, you don't think that much about it, but hey, if you stay in it long enough, Glenn, you're going to win a few games.
Hi, I'm Gary Worth, and thanks for watching Aggie Almanac. He's one of a kind, and he's both a local and a national legend. In this week's show, we bring you part 2 of our exclusive interview with Aggie legend, basketball coach Lou Henson, hosted by KRWG's Director of Broadcasting, Glenn Cerny.
You enjoyed an incredible streak at Las Cruces High School. Come back, achieve some incredible things here as the head coach at New Mexico State University, and then the decision to go to Illinois. I have to believe that was an excruciating decision when you took everything into consideration.
Glenn, through my years, the first year when I graduated from New Mexico State with a bachelor's, I applied for several jobs. After that, I never applied for another job. So I'd coached here, and I'd planned to be here for a long time. I was AD, and I was enjoying it and having good teams. And so one morning, Cecil Coleman, the AD at Illinois, called and said, Lou, I'd like for you to come up and interview for this job. And I said, sure, because Mary, my wife, grew up in the state not too far from Chicago and about 3 hours from the University of Illinois. And I said, I'd be very happy to do that. Would you believe? The AD at Oklahoma called me and said, would you come in for an interview? And of course, I grew up in the state. And I said, well, I don't think so. I'm going to Illinois, so I probably shouldn't do it. He said, look, here's what I'd like for you to do. The night before you go to Illinois, the day before, you come in, I'll have the board meet you in Tulsa, and we'll talk. And of course, my folks live there. And I said, well, sure, I'll do it. So I went in and met with the board, and I walked out, and so I never will forget, the AD said, look, Lou, we'll pay you exactly what we're paying Barry Switzer. And I got excited. Well, come to find out they were paying Barry Switzer $30,000. But I wanted Wade Walker to tell me, Wade, what are you paying him under the table? Oh, the extras, the TV and all that. So anyway, I pretty well knew when he said, now don't accept it, Illinois, until you talk to me. Well, I did talk to him, but I was going to go to Illinois. I thought at that time it was a better job.
You realize that if there are any young coaches that are listening to this, the envy they have that you're making a decision between a Big Ten school in Illinois, and at that time it would have been the Big 8 with Oklahoma.
That is correct.
What a difficult decision, and to have both of those sitting on the table just had to make you feel incredibly successful.
Well, like I said, 2 calls on the same day from 2 super institutions, and of course I liked Oklahoma. I grew up, but when I was growing up, Oklahoma State was a school that I really liked. But Illinois had been down for several years, and I thought it was a good place to coach. They have a great facility there, seats 16,000, and in the state of Illinois you have tremendous talent, so I think I made the right decision.
There's that little town just north of Champaign-Urbana that has quite a bit of basketball activity going on most of the time, called Chicago, if I recall.
There's no question about that. When I went in to coach at Illinois, and I'd coached there a year or two, and then 3 years before that, Illinois hadn't recruited a black player out of Chicago. So I told my assistants, Tony Yates, who played at Cincinnati, and they won 3 NCAAs when he was there. Whitkey, I told my assistants, I said, now we need to recruit Illinois. So our goal is to get into 400 high schools. And so at that time, Glenn, you could go day and night. It didn't make any difference. You weren't limited to the number of days and the number of times in high school. We did that. And our Final Four team in 1989, every player was from the state.
You replaced someone who went on and had great success in college basketball at Illinois, and Gene Bartow.
Gene had great success. Now, his last year at Memphis, we played him in New Mexico State because we were in the same league. And we were down 1 point with about 40 seconds to go, and I've never done this. I'd never done it before. I haven't done it since. We were 1 point down, so we stole the ball. And we had John Williamson on our team. And I said, we're going to run it down to about 8 seconds, and John, you're going to score the point, or the points to win it. And we got the ball to him. He shot the ball. It went in the basket and came out. And it was a great game. Of course, they went on to play UCLA in a championship game, and that's when Walton had about
21 of 22 at St. Louis.
That is correct. You know your sports. But yeah, that was a great game that we played, but we just couldn't quite beat them.
The great luck of covering that for United Press International. Ernie DiGregorio was there, and Barnes. It was just a wonderful NCAA. You know, we talk about, and when I was looking at this, my original thought was, well, you know, it's really strange that you would have two incredible legends such as yourself here in El Paso, but you go to Illinois, and there was a certain coach by the name of Meyer up at DePaul who also has a nice legacy to his name as well. So in both places, you paired up with some incredible coaching legends in the game of college basketball.
You're right, Glenn. Ray Meyer's a tremendous coach, and he had been in it for years, and he did a good job recruiting in the state. And then, Illinois is located in the heart of the Big Ten, so all of the other Big Ten schools would come in and rate our state for talent. And so that's why it took us 3 or 4 or 5 years to get it going, because we weren't getting the good players in the state.
83-84. Co-Big Ten champions, but I want to ask you about one game in particular. You play the Wolverines of Michigan, 4 overtimes, and you have a player that played all 60 minutes in Bruce Douglas. That is a Herculean effort.
I remember that game very well. 4 overtimes. I don't think I could have lasted another overtime, but Bruce played all of the minutes and just did a super job. We had a good ball club. It was a great ball game.
At some point, didn't one of your assistants say, hey, Coach, we really need to get him a breather?
Well, I'm sure they did several times, but he is a great point guard and tremendous defensive player, and he was strong, so we left him in there. We probably should have rested him, but we didn't do it.
You end up with a #1 ranking in '89, end up going 31-5, and we talked about the team and the high scoring, and you defended their defense, but again, they will always be known as that incredible offensive juggernaut that you had there for a period of about 3-4 years at Illinois. Kendall Gill, again, is one of them, a host of others. What was it like trying to coach that chaos that you were creating for the other teams you were playing?
You know, I've never coached a team like that, and I don't think I've seen a team exactly like the Flying Illini. They were all about 6'5". Didn't have a big man on there, and when we won our 17th consecutive game that year, and Kendall Gill broke his ankle. Okay, then we lost some games. He came back. That year, we didn't lose a game when Kendall Gill was in there until the championship game against Michigan. Now, we had beaten Michigan twice, had them down 25 at Michigan, and beat them about 16 or 17. But then 3 weeks later, we met them in the Final Four, and of course, Fisher became the coach. And we had injuries in the regionals. We had a battle who was injured, he slipped on water in Minnesota and hurt his leg, and then Lowell Hamilton sprained his ankle. So we weren't at full strength when we played Michigan in the semifinals. Lowell Hamilton, our 6'6", 6'7" postman, we listed him 6'7", he's about 6'6", but he hadn't worked out at all, and he missed his first 7 shots. And so anyway, to get the Final Four, to win key games, you got to have some breaks. You got to have a good ball club, and that team could have won it. As a matter of fact, the 3 ball clubs at New Mexico State had a chance. I had another ball club that had a chance. The 1984 team, we had to play Kentucky at Kentucky. We'd beaten the ACC champion Maryland. We played Kentucky at Kentucky. They had Bowie and the other 7-footer, and they beat us 3 points.
The Twin Towers that year.
Yeah, beat us 3 points, and that team could have won it also. So we had chances to win it, but just couldn't quite get it done.
I had the opportunity to be in that region at the time and had the chance to talk to some incredible coaches. You as well, we were talking earlier that I worked a tournament that Illinois played in. But I think the coaches that I got to talk to and that you coached against, and I'm thinking about Judd Heathcote up at Michigan State, or at Michigan, later at Iowa State, Bob Knight at Indiana, Gene Cady at Purdue at some point, all crossing paths. It just seemed to me to be such a wonderful time to be a coach in the Big Ten. The competition was fierce, but I always got the feeling that you as a group were willing to take the time to teach and talk to people.
Well, I'll tell you one thing, the Big Ten at that time, with all the veteran coaches, it was just a great league, and we'd have 6 or 7 in the NCAA, and one year with the NIT we had 9 out of the 10. So we had tremendous players and excellent coaches, and the attendance was super, and it's been down a little bit here lately. The second division, we've had 2 or 3 good ball clubs, but this year they're better. The second division ball clubs are much better, but it's a great league.
Okay, things are going great. You've been to the ranked #1, you've been to the Final Four, you've got a wonderful legacy going on at the University of Illinois, and decide to, I guess, retire in 1996?
In 1996, we got off to a good start. We were ranked about 11th in the country. Went to Duke, beat Duke, broke their 90-some game winning streak against non-conference people. Went into Hawaii, came out. Syracuse beat us, came out 11-1. And the very first game against Minnesota, a great guard for us tore up his shoulder. Garris tore up his shoulder, and so he was out for quite a while. We lost 5 games while he was out. And then we had a 6'7" kid, Hester. We had another injury there and another one. And we were playing great. We lost the last 5 games, all but 1 or 2 points after those injuries. I'd been in a long time and had some time left on my contract, and my wife and I talked about it, and I was 64 at the time. So I met with the AD and I said, no, look, we have 4 starters coming back. For the next 2 years, we're going to be good. But you're not going to have anything after that, because they were recruiting against me and my age. And so I said, but I'd like to be compensated. We all would. He said, well, let me talk to the administration. We talked, and they said, yes, we'll do whatever you want to do on it. And so that's how it happened. Now, to show you, with the 4 starters coming back, they moved up Turner, my 6th man. They won 22 the next year, went to NCAA and advanced. The next year they tied for the championship, did the same thing. The next year, when they lost my guys, they lost 19 games. And so Lon Kruger was coach, and he did a great job, but I mean, he just ran out of talent when we lost those guys who'd been good for me.
You weren't done coaching, though.
Well, I thought I was.
But then somebody called, and once again, I'm sure you were telling yourself, no, you can't go home again, but you did. And again, some very trying circumstances. My recollection is just before the start of the season, Coach McCarthy is let go here at New Mexico State, and they went to you, and you were complaining about how little you were paid, and you came here for, what, $1 a month?
Well, what happened on that, Jim Paul, the AD at that time, he called and he told me they they felt they had to make a change. And I told Jim, I said, well, Jim, hey, season is starting. I think this is September. And I said, Jim, you need to try to get through the year, work this thing out. Well, he called me about another week or two, and we talked about it. And then 2 days before practice started, I decided to come. But Mary and I had already decided I was drawing my retirement at Illinois. We certainly weren't wealthy, and we aren't today, but I told Jim, I said, well, I will take the job with one stipulation, that you don't pay me, because I want to help out for a year. And so we came down. I came down 2 days before practice, and then the next day I had to go to Texas to a banquet. And then I came back on Saturday, and we had Midnight Madness, and that's how I got acquainted with the team.
Well, and again, I'm going to jump, because not to diminish the first 2 seasons here, but the 98-99 team, again, one of the highlights of New Mexico State basketball. You go 12-4 in the Big West, and again, go to the NCAAs. But you also start to hit some of those milestones that most coaches only dream of. You hit your 200th win at New Mexico State University against University of California, Irvine, 60-56 on January 9th. Can you talk about that game?
Well, that was like a lot of the other games. When you have good talent and they play well, you're going to win ball games, and we played pretty well that night.
Then back here, end up beating Utah State 55-52 for your 700th win.
That was a struggle, because Utah State had a tremendous ball club, and we happened to pull that one out at the end. It was a good victory for us.
Did the impact hit you right away? Did you understand what 700 wins meant as a college coach?
I felt it.
I didn't ask if you felt it. I asked if you realized it.
Well, when you're coaching, you don't think that much about it. But hey, if you stay in it long enough, Glenn, you're going to win a few games.
You quite literally own the Pan American Center. You opened it up in 1968, I believe it was. Can you go back to the opening of the arena and what it was like being there and winning that first game?
Glenn, I came here in 1966, and they had the money for the Pan Am, but they hired Rem Alley, an architect who went to the University of Illinois, and he lived in Roswell. He was the architect. We had one. Usually they have 3 or 4 in big projects like that, but we had one. And then I helped him, and Fred Day, who was in charge of the physical plant. The 3 of us did most of the work on that, and I didn't do anything other than make suggestions to Rem Alley. And so it's hard to believe that building was built for $3 million. Now, actually, we had 3.5, but they had to build a tunnel from down on campus up through there and different things, and we wound up at $3 million. But the building was a great structure for that kind of money.
And of course, in 2002, something that I know was very special to you, to walk onto a court and have your name on it permanently affixed, and that dedication came in 2002. What was that night like?
Well, it really felt good, because I always enjoyed Las Cruces, this community, and the people, and to come back home and to have success, I felt good for myself and for the people in this community.
You have mentioned her several times, and we just haven't spent a whole lot of time about it, but we need to go way, way back, because you met someone when you came to New Mexico State University who's been a very, very important part of your life, and obviously I'm referring to your wife, Mary. Right.
As a matter of fact, when I was in junior college, it's hard to get work, and so 3 or 4 of the college guys, we went up to Illinois, and we got a job in a canning factory. Didn't make a lot of money, 95 cents an hour, but we put in a lot of hours, and met Mary up there. And later on, as a matter of fact, I met her one summer, and we got married 6 months later. And she's been quite an addition. She's been a great wife, and she does a great job with the children, and she even tries to assist me some when I was coaching.
Well, and this isn't a real compliment to the coaching ranks, I might add, but having talked to a lot of coaches' wives through my career, you guys may be the only ones who are more nomadic than broadcasters and have to listen to their wife's question why we're making this move now. So that says a great deal about her just there with all the moves and all of the games, and I know the frustrations of coaching.
Well, it really is. When we got called from Oklahoma and Illinois, we sat down with the kids, and so because we want to see what they were thinking, and they said, "Hey, Dad, do what you want to do, and we'd like to see you do it." And so Mary and I, we always talk about each and everything, and we're very close, and she is tremendous at PR. And in the coaching business in particular, you better be public relation minded. You can't survive if you're not. I think it's hard to survive in any business if you're not decent at PR.
Coming up on 54 years and never had an argument, right?
Let's see, maybe a couple, Glenn, along the way.
January 22nd, 2005, 19 NCAA appearances, 4 NITs, and I've got to read this off because the list is way too long for me to remember it. A total of 779 wins, and we should mention 432 losses in a lesser tone. And health caught up to you. It was time to leave.
Well, it really was. As a matter of fact, 6 years ago, I came down with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and so I coached that year, and we were about 500. As a matter of fact, we'd done better, but we had a player get in trouble, and we kicked him off the team, and then we had a problem with another point guard. We won 22 the year before. We should have won 20 or 22. But had we not had a problem with the point guard, we'd have done better than 500. But I coached that year and got through it pretty well.
You are still very, very much connected with New Mexico State University. And I know one of the things that both you and Mary are extremely proud of is the Henson Foundation. Can you talk a little bit about what it's been like to work with the university in that kind of regard and what the foundation has been able to accomplish?
Well, the university in the state of New Mexico in this area, they'd been great to us and our family, and we wanted to try to help out some way. And of course, our son was a basketball coach. In 1992, he was coaching at Parkland Junior College, and he played a game on Tuesday night, and my wife and his daughters went out there, and I couldn't go because it's illegal for me to go and watch him play. Well, after the game, he came by, and I said, "Why don't you leave the film? We'll look at it." And so he said, "Well, Dad, I'll look at it, and then I'll come over this weekend. We'll look at it." Well, that Friday night, the Friday afternoon, he had a practice, and he was going home. He lived right outside of Champaign, and it was windy and gusty, and first day of deer season, and so he was driving home, and we think he swerved to meet a deer. Another passenger in another car indicated that, and he went off and hit a culvert and turned over and didn't have a seatbelt on, and of course it killed him. And so we wanted to get involved with Lou and contribute some money in his name.
Can you talk a little bit about your career, what you consider highlights? And I ask this question because in having talked to some coaches, there's a lot of times you talk about that 28-1 season, you talk about that, but when you start talking to coaches and you pose the question a little differently, there's some of those teams that maybe weren't quite as successful that they carry perhaps proudest in their heart. Is there one of those teams, as you look back, what do you think is some of your finest moments, some of the moments that you will carry with you forever?
First of all, in high school, the 1959 team that won state that wasn't supposed to do anything, a small ball club, I mentioned their sizes, we weren't even supposed to be in the state tournament. I'll always remember that team. They showed great courage and tremendous ability to get it done. And of course, the Miracle Midgets. That's the most surprising team I've ever coached because we were 4-22 the year before, and we're going up against a great schedule, and they go to the NCAA and beat the national champs, split with New Mexico. That's a team I'll remember. And of course, I'll remember the Final Four team here, the 84 team at Illinois that should have been the Final Four, and of course the 89 team that did get there.
Any personal moments? Players, individuals that again maybe weren't the Kendall Gills that we were talking about, the Williamsons, the Moores, the Chris's, but that player that you just had that special appreciation for what they were able to do?
There were a lot of them, but there's a young man who played for me. When I was out at New Mexico State, he was in grade school or junior high. I saw him play and he made all of his shots. Joe Lopez. Joe Lopez followed me and he led us to the state title. He lives here in town and he was with me here administratively. And Joe is a great guy, and I've had a lot of good ones, but none better than Joe. To show you how much ability he is very intelligent. He is a very intelligent young man. He ran for the school board against 6 or 7 other people. Didn't even have a runoff. He won it. So he's one of several special people in my life.
It's always easy for older coaches, and I do the same thing. I watch and go, well, you know, they don't do this anymore. They don't. The game's not the same. Biggest change you've seen in the game from the 1950s to the late 2009, 10s?
Well, first of all, back when I played and coached in those few years, I thought the postman was the most difficult to cover or defend. That is not true today. The fellow who can take the ball, put it on the floor, and create, they are the toughest, because if you try to get defensive help, they get a layup or get a 3-point shot. So the game has changed, and I'll tell you what, it really revolutionized the game: the 3-point shot and the arc. The arc, 3-point shot, and the shot clock. That did everything. It's a completely different game today.
The speed is what always comes to mind when I watch and look at the differences.
Speed and quickness is the name of the game. You cannot be slow and play the game of basketball. You need a certain amount of speed and quickness to do it.
Ever get that itch to come back and say, well, maybe for just 1 or 2 more years?
Well, you know, I think about that, then I get it completely out of my mind in about 10 seconds.
Coach Henson, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us here. Really appreciate it, and I have to say, just on a personal note, to be able to sit and chat with one of the true legends of New Mexico State University is something very, very special, and we appreciate all that you've done, not only for NMSU, but for Las Cruces and the state of New Mexico as well.
Glenn, it's really nice to visit with you, and I look forward to working with you in the future. And by the way, I want to thank you for not mentioning the game that we lost in the tournament.
Well, we've talked about it, and there were a couple of them, but yes, and I try to be nice sometimes, you know. Again, thank you very much for taking the time.
I'm talking about the game against Toledo.
Yes, I'm aware of which one, and we should mention that you and I worked together at a tournament, the Glass City Classic in Toledo.
Right.
And I was working with Bowling Green at that point, beat Bowling Green on the first night, and then the second night, Bowling Green's arch rival is Toledo, and I ended up going and broadcasting for Toledo, and then you lost to Toledo. How could have you let us down after beating us on the first night?
Bob Nichols had a great ball club. And
Bob Nichols was a great coach, wasn't he?
He was a great coach. By the way, and I mentioned this to you earlier, Craig Tucker was a tremendous guard. He missed 18 straight shots in that tournament. So coaches, hey, we have to blame somebody. I blame the players when we get beat.
And it was defense, right? So it was
right.
Again, thank you so much for taking the time. And we thank you for joining us as we chat with truly an Aggie legend, Coach Lou Henson from New Mexico State University.
And our thanks to KRWG's Director of Broadcasting, Glenn Cerny, for hosting this 2-part interview with Aggie great Coach Lou Henson. Probably the most comprehensive conversation with the coach ever done on television. And we hope you enjoyed this insight into the life and career of this amazing local legend.